I just wanted, Henry Wollman was going to introduce you tonight because we have some guests, if that's okay, from
sure.
our regulars. So, Henry, you have the floor.
Thank you. Our inexhaustible President Gold has asked me, mistakenly believing I am capable of this task, to present this evening a very brief expression of gratitude on our collective behalves to Rabbi Rosensweig at this critical 5781 Yamim Noraim interlude in this inauspicious and complex 2020 year. As a vehicle of delivery for such a thank you remark, the sentiment.
The introduction to thanking Rosensweig, please.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead. Everyone, please go on mute except Henry. Henry, go.
A sentiment strongly shared and heartfelt by all of us. I am sad to confess an inappropriate choice among you illustrious members of the FAS Rosensweig Shiur, with many significantly brighter candles than myself among you and my fellow Yeshiva University high school graduates in long-standing attendance and devotion to this shiur. But I accept it only to put you all to the test of your collective capacities for Rahmanas and forgiveness towards such an inadequate messenger on this important thank you on this near Erev Yom Kippur Tuesday. All of us know the great credentials and brilliance, Reitz Rosh Yeshiva, Rosh Kollel, distinguished invitee here in Israel and elsewhere for many guest darshanings and shiur occasions that Rav Rosensweig brings to our FAS community, and the intensity of respect and devotion that our own internal leadership, Rabbi Emeritus Roth, Honorary President Merkin Cantor Maravani, confirm in this regard in their historic constancy of engagement with the Rosensweig shiur. On these occasions, Rav Rosensweig graces us with the politesse of his presence, unmatched erudition, dveikus, modesty, and humor. Perhaps for a simple soul such as myself, humor above all. His extraordinary wife, whom I've had the honor of meeting but a few times, but always parting with a great impression she makes, perhaps parallels me in my placing his humor as primus inter pares among his qualities. On the other hand, his anevus mikol vayu rabbanim might be another such quality. Who among us is not awed, continually, not just intermittently, by his comprehensive knowledge of the entirety of Shas texts, his ability to refer with gentle confidence to a Mishnah paragraph or a single line of a faraway but related Meseches or Perek or Daf, or a Rashi or a Tosafos comment, in specific cross citation of some associated point or broader framework relevant to the discussion at hand in front of us, or his amazing command of Rishonim commentaries, his seemingly by heart knowledge and devotion for Rambam, and his engagement with even a few Achronim, although we hear less about them, their temporal nearness to modernity may not be Rav Rosensweig's greatest passion. Or his weekly Makoros, prepared systematically with his wide-ranging technical knowledge, authority, and cleverness, and laid out for all of us on such a seemingly nonchalant platter. Oh, are the Makoros by any chance around each shiur, as if he had only spent barely a moment of his precious time to gather together these disparate texts, citations, arguments, and counter-arguments. I end with a personal observation. I am, as an architect, urban planner, and developer, almost always preferably attentive in our office work to underlying principle, core generalization, and base rationale for what we are proposing. The minutiae details of building structure, government permits, even our financing technique for a project are not my strongest passions and usually left best to others. I am similarly guilty, therefore, more than a few times of impatience with the details of a Rosensweig Shiur exposition when he focuses so brilliantly but microscopically, as in recent Shiur years, on the halachic details of, for example, the condition of a blade for a kosher shchita, the composition of a particular Sanhedrin size and membership, the specialness of an action within the Beis HaMikdash setting as opposed to the same action outside the Beis HaMikdash, the level of responsibility of an owner for his animal-caused accident in Rishus HaRabim, whether on Shabbos or Chol, the changing boundaries for Eretz Yisrael in successive Tanakh texts and historical frameworks across 5 centuries, if not more, and the procedural and devotional consequences thereby, or the special qualities of Bedikas Chametz as a vital pre-Pesach action. You all get the point. Rav Rosensweig has no fear of halachic particularity, minutiae, its relevance to the Talmudic discourse and the ongoing continuity and contribution of such minutiae, indeed the vitalness of such minutiae, to the essence of learning and practice within the Jewish tradition and its survival. Yet my underlying nature revives, and I hear Rav Rosensweig approach a more philosophic tone of discussion, looking for underlying framing essence as opposed to specific instance, and deriving comprehensive Jewish principles that emerge from, form, and frame particularities into a philosophic whole. We were all graced with such a mode of Rav Rosensweig's virtuosity when he gathered for us in his pre-Rosh Hashanah shiur only last week in an exposition of why the shofar is not blown on Shabbos, the distinction between a Rosh Hashanah pasuk in Parshas Pinchas and one in Parshas Emor, one using the term Yom Truah, the other Yom Zichron Truah, and what the meaning and rationale of the distinctions between these two, after all, both D'Oraisa terms might be. It was philosophy for me of a high order, and Rav Rosensweig closing segment of the shiur on the importance of the Zichron text stayed with me in my personal battle for attentiveness throughout this past Rosh Hashanah. For after all, he made it clear, so much of our Yiddishkeit and Judaic essence is indeed Zichron, Truah, text, history, Yom Tov, Shabbos, ritual, the temporal linkage of Jewish act within the structure of Jewish time, the philosophic centrality of Zikaron, explicitly recalled and expressed in so many daily, weekly, and yearly locutions. Thus, indeed, Rav Rosensweig's shiur remarks last week, grounded on the one hand in a technicality surmising the effort of Truah perhaps being a forbidden Shabbos near avoda of some sort, but ending in his broad, engaging, marvelously expressed philosophical closing of the meaning of Zichron, made me, and I'm certain made all of us, grateful for having this deeply gifted Ilui in our presence as an integral part of this historic New York City, American, Orthodox, contemporary Jewish community at FAS, and as a Talmud partner to our beloved Rabbi Emeritus Roth and our contemporary Rabbi Babich, and least but not last to our esteemed, exceptionally hardworking, and very devoted president, Rabbeinu Morenu Todah.
Shkar.
Thank you very much. That was very touching. I really am very moved by the beautiful way that you introduced me. And not only the appreciation of how seriously people take the shiur and they listen and think about it afterwards, but the kind way in which you think of me as well is very meaningful and much appreciated. So I don't want to say too much, but thank you very much. And as I say, I know a lot of thought and affection and went into your presentation, and I appreciate it very, very much. This is really a very special group. Each individual who comes to our regular shir is somebody who is making a serious investment and a serious commitment. And it's nice to be appreciated, but you should be aware that the appreciation goes in both directions. And I'm aware that everybody's making a commitment. I was on the phone today with someone who I respect very much, a leader in the Balabatim community of New York. And he had heard me recently, and he said, I see you don't just give the Zoom 25-minute share. It takes much longer. So, but I appreciate that people are interested in serious Talmud Torah. I believe in it very much, and finding an appreciative audience and a community to share that with and to grow with, and the conversations and the questions and the insights which deepen my understanding is part of the appreciation as well. So again, thank you. It's your words are very much appreciated. Let's go to the task at hand. Of course, we stand right now at a bit of a crossroads, bein Kesa la'asar, between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. It's a fascinating thing that the Gemara in Masechet Rosh Hashanah, I'm hearing an echo. I'm not sure whether that's from my side or
Yeah, if everyone go on mute, someone's on two phones probably. Let's go.
Okay, as long as it's not coming from me, it doesn't disturb me. I just don't want to be the cause of it. We stand, I'd say, at a bit of a crossroad between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, in a period of time, that is often called Aseres Yemei Tshuva. The Gemara actually, in a few places, really speaks of it, Asara Yamim Shebein Rosh Hashanah Liyom Kippurim, making it sound as if there are 10 days in between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. I mean, Rosh Hashanah, 10 days, and Yom Kippur. Of course, that's not the case. It's an integrated period that begins with Rosh Hashanah and that concludes with Yom Kippur. But the Gemara, I think, gives this somewhat imprecise impression intentionally in order to establish, that the period that connects Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur is both a bridge and also, the beginning and the end of the process itself. And therefore, it requires that we pay very close attention to all aspects of this process. The process began on Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah has a Yom HaRichta, so it's like a 48-hour day, in some respects. And of course, it concludes on Yom Kippur. But the truth is that there's a fundamental, in this process are fundamentally different stages. Rosh Hashanah begins as a very individualistically accentuated holiday. Every individual finds himself in a different circumstance in the beginning of the process, depending on his own personal history, his experiences in the past year, and his experiences over a lifetime, essentially. And Rosh Hashanah, I've spoken about this in past years, really is filled with so many motifs, Malchios, Achronos, and Shofros, and as we heard, Yom Trua and Zichron Trua. There's, Gaonim who thought the right thing to do in Rosh Hashanah is to fast, and others, and this is the way that we go about it, to feast, because the range and the consideration of every individual's needs is vast. And then we proceed to Yom Kippur, which is very much a communal event. It also remains an individual event, but as we'll see about both aspects. And one in which most of Klal Yisrael are observers. They're participants through the actions of the Kohen Gadol, but they are integrated and united in his activities. In the time of the Beis HaMikdash, the central event was the Avoda, which took most of the day, in which the Kohen Gadol not only presided, but practically, on a practical level, in terms of implementation, constituted a one-man show. And, Kol ha'am, ha'omdim ba'azara, kishahayu shomim, es Hashem, people were watching and they were responding. And of course, they were identifying. And we'll soon see that there was an element, of course, of representation. But at the same time, how different is that from the beginning of the process, Rosh Hashanah? So in that bridge, which is also an integrated single unit, going from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur, these 10 days constitutes a process. And it's fascinating that the Gemara in Masechet Rosh Hashanah, commenting on the verse that we read in the Haftorah of Tzom Gedalia and Alt Somos yesterday, right? Dirshu Hashem bihi matzo, kira'uhu bo'oso v'oso karov, right? Seek God where he is found. Kira'u, call him, b'oso karov, where he is to be found close. The Gemara says, Elo aseres hayamim. This refers to the 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And the Rambam codifies this in his halachos as well. If you look in the Rambam in Hilchos Bay, in Perek Beis of Hilchos Tshuva, this is in the Mar Makomos that we sent out for today. I'm guessing it's on page, you'll help me out here, the bottom of page 3 probably. Perek Beis, Hilchos Tshuva, Halacha Vav. Is that the bottom of page 3? I'll assume yes. So the Rambam says, Afal pi she'atshuva v'hatza'aka yafa li'olam, even though prayer and repentance, crying out in repentance, is always a positive, always beneficial mode of service. B'asara hayamim shebein Rosh Hashanah l'Yom Kippurim, in the 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, hi yafa b'yoser, it is particularly propitious, particularly effective, umiskabelas himiyad, and it is immediately effective or accepted. Shenemar, based on this Gemara that I mentioned, this pasuk, Dirshu Hashem b'himatzo. Bamedvar mamurim b'yachid. Aval tzibur, kozman she'osim tshuva, v'tzoakim b'leiv shalem, heim nanim, shenemar kashem elokeinu, b'chol kara'inu elav. The 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are a propitious time for tshuva and its acceptance. And likewise, the tshuva of the tzibur, kozman she'osim tshuva, v'tzoakim b'leiv shalem, that is also effective. And then in the next halacha, it's fascinating, halacha Zayin, the Ram says that Yom Kippurim, huzman tshuva l'kol yachid u'lerabim, that Yom Kippur is a time of tshuva for individuals and for the community, who kates mechila uslicha liYisrael. It is the culmination of the process of mechila and slicha, forgiveness for Klal Yisrael. Lefikach, therefore, chayavim hakol lasos tshuva u'lisvados b'Yom Kippurim. Therefore, it is obligatory, it is incumbent upon each and every Jew to do tshuva and to confess on Yom Kippur. And then he says, "U'mitzvahs vidu Yom Kippur sheyatchel me'erev hayom kodem sheyochal shem yechanik b'suda kodem sheyizvada." It begins a little bit in advance of Yom Kippur, just in case. V'alfa pi sheyizvada kodem sheyochal chozer mizvada b'leil Yom Kippurim arvis v'chozer mizvada b'shachris b'musaf, b'mincha, b'neila, b'hechen mizvada, and where's this? How does this vidui take place? Yachid achar tfilaso, ushliach tzibur be'emsa tfilaso, bebracha revius. So the Rambam, based on the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah, again characterizes the time from Rosh Hashanah through Yom Kippur as being particularly conducive to tshuva. That's why we call them Aseres Yemei Tshuva. And not only that, but he makes it clear that there is an obligation to do tshuva on Yom Kippur, that Yom Kippur is the period of tshuva that integrates Shel Yachid and Shel Tzibur. We'll get back to that point in a couple of minutes. Okay. There is even a practice, the Rambam, when he formulated Hilchos Tshuva, did so pretty much in a vacuum. In other words, this year we're going to be studying, the laws of Pesach and Chametz Matzah. The laws of Chametz Matzah are found in the Mishnayos and in the Gemara in Pesachim. Last year we studied Chulin. The laws of Shchita are found in the first couple of prakim of Masachet Chulin. The year before we studied Bava Kama. The laws of Bava Kama, are found in Masachet Bava Kama. But there's no Masachet Tshuva, right? There are some Gemaras in the end of Masachet Yoma, and here and there in Rosh Hashanah, and then in Tainis. All over Shas you have references to the concept of Tshuva. But there's no Masachet Tshuva. So the Rambam, in constructing Hilchos Tshuva, really took the initiative. And it's a magnificent construction. Post-Rambam, nobody can discuss Hilchos Tshuva, right, without making reference to, and without, being, incredibly influenced. You might be influenced in an accepting way, sometimes in a combative way, and, different kinds of reactions. But subtly and explicitly, post-Rambam, no discussion of Hilchos Tshuva can ignore, the magnificent construction of Hilchos Tshuva. It's interesting that this construction has 10 chapters. And the suggestion has been made, that since Elo Asara Yamim Shebein Rosh Hashanah Liyom Kippurim, that it's no coincidence that the propitious days of Tshuva are these 10 days, and there are 10 chapters. It's a common practice for many people to study a chapter a day of Rambam's Hilchos Tshuva in Aseres Yemei Tshuva. Something that's recommended. It's very worthwhile. It's always worthwhile to read the Rambam, and his incredible systemization of Hilchos Tshuva is a great example of his innovative and organizational and insightful combination of powers. So basically, in the Talmud, in our tradition, and even more so in the Rambam, the idea that the period beginning with Rosh Hashanah and culminating with Yom Kippur is the period of Tshuva is something which is obvious and seemingly beyond any kind of controversy. Okay. Having said that, it's fascinating to note, and this is what I want to zero in on, that it's specifically the day of Yom Kippur and the kapara, the atonement that is initiated by Yom Kippur, and in that specifically, there seems to be some question about the role of tshuva. And that seems to be A, problematic, and B, ironic. So let me explain what I mean. There's a major debate in the Gemara in Masachet Yoma and Shavuos. I have the text of Shavuos for reasons that I'll get to in a couple of minutes, between Rebbe and the Chachamim. Machlokas Tanoi. Rebbe was of the opinion that Itzumo Shel Yom Kippurim is mechaper b'li tshuva, meaning that if a person observes Yom Kippur properly, and in other words, he's serious about what he does, even if he doesn't repent, the day itself, the power of the day, sanctity of the day, we call it Itzumel Shel Yom, is mechaper. The Gemara in Shavuos makes reference to this. Let's just look at it for a moment. We'll get back to the broader text in a few minutes. But look here on page, excuse me, look on page 1. On page 1, you'll see that the Talmud Babli Masachet Shavuos Yud Gimel Amud Aleph, the third entry. So you look here at the third entry. The Gemara says, Rab Zera. Let's go back a couple of lines into the second entry. The Gemara says, okay, maybe we'll go faster if we don't skip. So the Gemara says, Al Shar Aveira Shabbatorah, the second entry. Talmud Babli, Masachet Shavuos Yud Beis Amud Beis. The Gemara says, Al Shar Aveira Shabbatorah, Hakalos v'Achamuros, and other Averos in the Torah, to the exclusion of what the Mishnah is speaking about previously, which is Tumas Mikdash v'Kadasha, a very specialized area that is the focus of the Karbanos of Rosh Chodesh and other holidays, including Yom Kippur, namely the sanctity and the purity of the Mizbeach and of the Beis HaMikdash. But on Shar Averos, Hakalos v'Chamuros, the lighter Averos and the more stringent ones, Hasdonos v'Ashkagos, whether you violated intentionally or unwittingly, etc. In all these cases, the Mishnah says that Sira Mishtaleach is Mechaper. The special korban that was kind of the twin, not really a twin, but equal in stature and appearance to the korban that was Nichnas Lefnai V'Lefnim. There were a pair of korbanos, a pair of goats, two Seirim. Seir, which was Nichnas Lefnai V'Lefnim, and sprinkled in the Kodesh HaKadashim, most holy, intimate place in the Beis HaMikdash. And the parallel counterpart goat was sent to the Midbar and was unceremoniously pushed off the steep mountain, the Tzuk. They pushed it off the mountain, and that was the method of performing the avoda of the Sira Mishtaleach. So this Sira Mishtaleach, there was a vidui, there was a confession that was made by the Kohen Gadol on behalf of all Klal Yisrael. We'll discuss that in a couple of minutes. And after that, it was, set up, and then it was sent into the Midbar, etc. And this is a method of kapara, of atoning for the sins of Klal Yisrael. So the Mishnah says that Al Shar Aveira Shabbatorah, Hakalos, Hachamuros, Hasdonos, Hashkagos, all these were atoned by the Korban Seira Mishtaleach. So the Gemara says, what are all these categories? Hainu Kalos, Hainu Aseh, Velos Aseh. The Gemara says, Kalos, Chamuros, Aseh, Los Aseh, Chamuros, Hainu Krisos, and Visas Bezdin, where there's a death penalty associated with the transgression. Hoda, Hainu Mezid, Lo Hoda, Hainu Shogeg. So the Gemara clarifies. Omer Rav Yehuda Haki Kamar. Al Shar Aveira Shabbatorah, on other Averos, Bein Kalos, Bein Chamuros, the severe ones and the lighter ones, relatively. Aseh v'los aseh, what are the Bein Shasa B'Shogeg, Bein Mezid, Osan Shasa B'Shogeg, Bein Noda, Sveikan, Bein Lo Noda, Lo Sveikan, whether you knew or didn't know that you violated. And Elohin Akalos, what are Kalos? Aseh v'los aseh, Elohin Chamuros, Krisos and Misas Bezin, when there's a death penalty. So then the Gemara says, hold on for a minute. What is the kapara? What atonement does the Sira Mishtaleach bring a mitzvah saseh? If a person, is atoning for not fulfilling a positive commandment, he didn't put on tefillin, he didn't do the mitzvah of lulav, whatever. So the Gemara says, well, how does that work? Kaya say chadami. Either lo avad tshuva, If he didn't do tshuva, then zevach rishayim toeva. If he has yet to do tshuva, then his korban is ineffective. It's called zevach rishayim. It's the korban of a rasha because he didn't do tshuva, didn't square his record. And toeva, it's a despicable thing. Ida avad tshuva. If we're talking about somebody who did do tshuva, then kol yom anami. Why do we need the serum mishtaleach and Yom Kippur? We have a rule. The Tanya Avram mitzvah saseh v'asa tshuva. If a person violated the mitzvah saseh, actually this Gemara appeared in Chulin, the previous Gemara that we were learning through till the summer. V'asa tshuva lo zazu misham ad shemochlin lo. If a person does tshuva, then kapara, atonement, is immediate. So the Gemara says, Omer Abzera, but Omeid B'mirdo. We're talking about somebody who remains rebellious. Not really rebellious, but meaning he hasn't done tshuva. But how then could the Sira Mishtaleach properly atone for his behavior? He hasn't done tshuva. So the Gemara says, V'Rebihi, the Tanya, Rebbe Omer, Al Kol Averisha B'Torah, on all of the regular transgressions, Bein Asa Tshuva, Bein Lo Asa Tshuva, whether you do or did not do tshuva, Yom Kippur Mechaper. The sanctity of the day itself, of Yom Kippur, as long as you are respectful, you're reverent, right? You're observing Yom Kippur, that alone will bring atonement. Chutz, unless this person is someone who is in violation of particularly egregious sins that show that he's not a reverent, serious Jew, for example, Porek Ol, Megala Panim Batorah, Mefer Bris Basar. We're not going to go into the details. She'imas Tshuva Yom Kippur Mechaper, V'imlav en Yom Kippur Mechaper. My time of the Rebbe, what's the reasoning of Rebbe? The Tanya Kidvar Hashem Baza. Za Porek Ol, Megala Panim Batorah, Es Mitzvaso Hefer. He disrupted the mitzvos. Za Mefer Bris Babasar. Hikares, of Yom Kippur, Tikares la'ach Yom Kippur. Yochel afilu asa tshuva, Talmud lomer avona ba, lo amarti el vizman shavona ba. V'Rabbanan, what do the Rabbanan think? Hikares b'olam hazeh, Tikares la'olam haba. Avona ba, shem asa tshuva, right? Umeis misa memarekes. Basically, the Gemara is recording what appears in other Masechtas as well. And that's the debate between Rebbe and the Chachamim, whether the essential day of Yom Kippur, right, alone, without tshuva, I'm just asking a simple question. Yom Kippur is Yom Keit Slicho Mechila Yisrael, as the Rambam puts it. And Rebbe thinks that you don't need tshuva? It's the culmination of Aseres Yemei Tshuva. It's the Dirshu Hashem Behimatzo Karov Bioso Karov, but you can get away without tshuva. Very peculiar. We'll see. It's even more peculiar. Now again.
Well, let's just go back to Rebbe gave a shir earlier about the day being mechaper alone.
Say that again.
Rebbe gave a shir in earlier years about the day being mechaper. That the day has a.
That, and I want to talk about the Sira Mishtaleach being mechaper, but I want to explain how or if that is compatible with Yom Kippur being the culmination of Aseres Yemei Tshuva. Okay, that's what I want to talk about this evening. So Rebbe is of the opinion, right, that Yom Kippur is mechaper without tshuva. Do we paskin like Rebbe? Well, the Rambam, you could say, well, the Rambam doesn't have a problem. He says that Yom Kippur is Keit Slicho Mechila L'Kol Yisrael today, and therefore Lefikach Kol Adam Yisrael Chayev Lasos Tshuva. Right?
But we have that in the tefillah itself.
Yeah.
Ketzu Mechila or Slicha, we have it in one of the tefillahs of Yom Kippur.
Yeah,
So
for sure.
Mimele, it is and maybe we have to decide one way or the other.
Well, there's no contradiction to what Rebbe said and Yom Kippur being Kate Slicho Mechila. Slicho Mechila means you get forgiveness, you get atonement. What I'm wondering is, the Rambam, however, that I read before, Perek Beis, Halacha Ches, says, since it's Kates Yimei Slicho Mechila, Lefikach, therefore, Chayev Kol Adam, Kol Echad Mi Yisrael, Lasos Tshuva.
True.
Is that compatible with Rebbe? Is calling it Aseres Yimei Tshuva compatible with this? That's what I want to know. Now, alone, this would not be a problem because the Rambam paskins against Rebbe. How do I know that? Look at Perek Aleph, Hilchos Tshuva, Halacha Gimel. We're going to work backwards a little bit. Perek Aleph, Hilchos Tshuva, Halacha Gimel. This is probably either the bottom of 3 or the beginning of 4.
3.
Bottom of 3? Bizman hazeh, the Rambam says, Bizman hazeh, she'ein beis hamikdash kayam, ve'ein lanu mizbeach kapara, ein sham ela tshuva. In our time, the Rambam was writing in the Middle Ages, still true, unfortunately, in our time. We don't have a beis hamikdash. There are no karbanos, and therefore, just excuse me for 1 second. And therefore, all we have is tshuva. A tshuva mechaperes al kol averos. Tshuva, repentance, neutralizes all transgressions. Afilu rasha kol yamav, even if he's been evil all the years. V'asa tshuva ba'acharona, and in the end he does tshuva. Ein mazkirin lo shum davar mirisho, shenema rishat harasha lo yikashel ba, v'yom shuvo mirisho. If a person repents, you don't say, I remember you from from all your transgressions. You went to this restaurant and you did this Chil Shabbos, and that's not the way you behave to somebody who does sincere tshuva. You shouldn't embarrass him or remind him. Right? He knows it himself, frankly. And then the Rambam says, V'atzmo Yom Kippurim, right? Yom Kippur itself, its power, mechaper lashavim. It accomplishes kapara lashavim. What does lashavim mean?
I mean that there is a process.
One second. To those who do tshuva.
With a crescendo.
The Rambam paskins like the Chachamim and not like Rebbe. So you could say that what the Rambam says in Perek Beis and his extensive treatment of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, the 10 days, is consistent with his view that Yom Kippur is not mechaper without tshuva. That's all fine and good, except for one thing. The Rambam has a very innovative and controversial psak about the korban ira mishleach. So look at the previous halacha base. I'm reading backwards, not the words hopefully, but the order, and you'll see why. The Rambam says in Perek Aleph Halacha Beis, page 3, that Se'ira Mishtaleach, this goat that is part of a pair, right, that is thrown off the mountain, which bears the kapara of Klal Yisrael, the Mishnah in Masechet Shavuos, and the Psukim, of course, in Parshas Achrei Mos, the Se'ira Mishtaleach Lefishu kapara al Klal Yisrael, because it is an atonement on all of Klal Yisrael. The language I'm going to get back to, I think every word that the Rambam uses is gold in intention. I'll explain what the problems are and what I think it's about in a minute. But first I want to build up the problem or the issue, not really a problem. Se'ir Mishtalech is a kapara al Kol Yisrael. Therefore, says the Rambam, Kohen Gadol misvad elav. The Kohen Gadol is the one who does the vidui, the confession on this korban. Al lashon kol Yisrael, an interesting language, in the name of or using language which encompasses or which reflects, his mission. We'll discuss exactly what that means in a few minutes. Shenemar b'hisvada alav et kol avonot b'nei Israel. Then the Rambam explains the details. Se'ira mishtalech mechaper, it atones, al kol avera shebetorah. Akalos v'hachamuros. Lenient and severe. This comes from the Mishnah in Shavuos and the Gemara that we previously read. Bein she'avar b'zadon, bein she'avar b'shgaga. Right? It's all part of that. Whether he was intentional or unwitting, bein shehodalo, bein lo hodalo, whether he knew or didn't know about it, did it without even knowledge. Hakom l'skaper b'sira mishtaleach. And then the Rambam adds, Behu she'asa tshuva. Now that alone is fascinating, because of course you have to do tshuva.
Rabbi,
Right?
Rabbi.
Yes. Can I do, just let me finish. I'll get the question. I promise I'll take the question in 1 minute. Let me just finish this text, okay? Behu she'asa tshuva, the way the Rambam writes it is, but there's a condition, and that is you have to do the tshuva. That's very strange, because in the previous halacha, which we'll examine in a few minutes, the Rambam says that a korban chatos and a korban asham, all the korbanos require tshuva. Here he makes it as an afterthought. So your mishtaleach is going to work for you, right? V'hu she'asa tshuva. Okay, so far the language is a little strange in more than one way, but at least so far we don't have any problems. Then comes the next line, and then I'll take the question. Avalim lo asa tshuva, if he doesn't do tshuva, eina sa'ir mechaper ela al hakalos. We'd expect the Rambam to say, if there's no tshuva, there's no kapara. Instead, the Rambam says, if there's no tshuva, then the sira mishtaleach will be effective only for mitzvahs haseh and mitzvahs los haseh, but not for any capital offenses. But for kalos, it'll actually work absent tshuva. That is a remarkable Rambam. We'll see in a moment. Umahin kalos mein chamuros, chamur shechayav misas bezin o kares, shua shav v'sheker, afa v'shem v'em kares, reim min chamuros, and shar mitzvahs los haseh, mitzvahs shehein v'em kares, ein kalos. So before I take the question, what I'm trying to suggest is, even though the Rambam says that Yom Kippur alone requires shavim, although he doesn't say tshuva actually, he says shavim, Mizi Pascha is like the Chachamim against Rebbe. Okay, that seemed to have saved the day. Although it's strange still that Rebbe has his view. I mean, the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah speaks about, Rosh Hashanah as a Serasim Tshuva, even according to Rebbe. But what's much more problematic is the Rambam says that Seira Mishtaleach, one that is unique and singular to Kapara, half of the Averos will be atoned for even without tshuva. Now, just to make it clear before I take the question, this psak of the Rambam is not in the Gemara. On the contrary, it's a controversial psak that seems to be against the Gemara. The Gemara in Shavuos that I quoted before reflects, and Gemara in Yudah, the debate between Rebbe and the Chachamim about whether the day of Yom Kippur is mechaper with or without tshuva. That debate applies seemingly to mitzvahs haseh, mitzvahs los haseh, alos, and chamuras. And we paskin like the Chachamim that you need tshuva. Rebbe was of the opinion that even chamuros don't need tshuva, except for mefer bris and porek all, and person ba'et b'Yom Kippur. All the others, yitzum shayom is mechaper b'li tshuva. So where did the Rambam get the idea that there's a distinction between kalos and chamuros, and that distinction applies to the Sira Mishtaleach? The Gemara in Shavuos actually is against it. And this is indeed the question of the Kesef Mishnah. If you look at the Kesef Mishnah, and then I'll take the question, this is all one continuum, so I'm not delaying the question. But if you look at the page 4, I believe, or it could be already 5, Kesef Mishnah, Hilchos Tshuva, Perek Aleph. Everybody have that? Is that page 4 or 5?
4.
4. Umat, the second one. Oh, no, let's go for the first one. Amrina da'aliba de Rebbe, afil lo asa tshuva, sira mishtaleach mechaper. Rebbe says even without tshuva, the sira mishtaleach atones. Aval aliba de Rabbanan, according to the Rabbanan, dafka b'shasa tshuva, sira mishtaleach mechaper. Aval lo asa tshuva ein mechaper. V'yadua de ein alacha kerebi mechaverov, v'lachein kasav rabbeinu v'hu shasa tshuva. Ram writes V'hushasa tshuva because we don't paskin like Rebbe, we paskin like the Chacham in the majority opinion. But then he says, Umasha Kosav, but what the Rambam added, Avalim loas tshuva ein asar mechaper ela lakalos, that when it comes to kalos, the lighter mitzvos, the sir mishnaleach is mechaper even without tshuva, kashali. Hasamashma del rabbanon afilu avar asayim loas tshuva ein sir mechaper. Rebbe alfiu ala chamuras mechaper below tshuva chutz miporekol umegal panim batorah made for bris. The tzarchia. Kesef Mishnah, the author of the Shulchan Aruch, quotes this Rambam, says, I don't know where he got it from. It seems to be against the Talmud Bavli. The Lechem Mishnah, which I'm not going to read right now, asks even more vigorously and makes an interesting suggestion how to read the Bavli, but it's a contortion. The Mefarshim have noted that there is a Yerushalmi in Masechet Shavuos, Perek Aleph, Mishnah Vav, that seems to say, at least about mitzvah saseh, that the seira mishtaleach is mechaper b'li tshuva. That might be the source of the Rambam. That's the speculation. The Avodas HaMelech and others suggest that the Yerushalmi is the Rambam source. But it should be noted that the Yerushalmi only speaks about mitzvah aseh, and the Rambam speaks about aseh and los aseh. And even then, the Rambam turned his back on an explicit passage in the Talmud Bavli to embrace an amorphous text in the Yerushalmi and paskins that way? Very strange. How does that fit in with the idea that Yom Kippur is the culmination of Yemei Tshuva and is the day of Chiyuv Tshuva, which is a extraordinary statement of the Rambam, as I'll explain in just a minute as well. Before that, we had a question.
משהו, גמרא דקדוק שאני כאן לא כל כך הבנתי איך לקרוא, כתוב בהלכה ב' ברמב"ם, בין שהודע לו, בין שלא הודע לו, או היוודע לו. אתה קורא את זה בין שהודע או לא הודע. איך צריך לקרוא את זה? הודע או היוודע לו?
הודע, הודע.
העין טעות כאן. צריך להיות במקום העין ה'.
בין שהודע לו, בין שזה ידוע לו שהוא חטא,
הודע כתב
לא ידוע.
ה' בעין, אז זה צריך עם ה' בסוף.
In the מקורות.
במקור.
In the מקורות.
הרמב"ם. בהלכה ב'.
I understand. בין הודע לו, it's a Mishnah.
אז זה ה'.
בין שהודע לו,
זהו.
בין שלא הודע לו.
בגלל העין חשבתי צריך לקרוא בין היוודע לו, שהוא ידע ש...
לא, הודע.
יש במקור כאן, אז אני אבדוק.
סליחה, המילה
הודע. This has nothing to do with the Rambam. This is actually the language of the...
Yes, and may I say, Rabbi, that the...
Just so you should know that the first, if you look at the first makor, it's the language of the Mishnah in Masechet Shavuot. Al shar averot shabatorah, hakalos v'achamuros, hasdonos v'ashkogos, hoda v'lo hoda, asa v'lo ase. But I don't want to get into the, we'll discuss the diktuk of it another time. But the idea behind it...
Because I wanted to say that hoda with an ayin still has in it the root of whether it's an ayin or an hey, it's okay. The ayin is okay.
Hu hodia lo.
Hodia.
Lo. Hoda or lo hoda.
Right.
Anyways, that's right. But right, that's a different.
Well, that's my.
I thought you were going to ask me something, about the more about the tochen, but that's fine. Either way, so basically, where are we so far? Let me bet we don't have so much time in front of us, so let me make clear what we've done so far. And by saying that the Aseres Yemei Tshuva, Dirshu Hashem B'Himatzo, Elo Aseres Hayom Sheben Rashon Yom Kippurim of Tshuva. That's what they're called. Aseres says that Yom Kippurim is the Keit Slicho Mechila Yisrael Lefikach Chayev Alechav Mi Yisrael Lasos Tshuva. This is a particularly important statement for the following reason. Let's go back to Hilchot Tshuva again for a minute. This is on page 3 The Rambam in Hilchos Tshuva Perek Aleph says, Kol mitzvot shebatorah bein aseh ben lo aseh, im avar adam al achat mehen bein b'zadon bein b'shgaga. If a person, as an individual, violates any mitzvah of the Torah, positive or negative, whether intentionally or unwittingly, accidentally, k'sheyaseh tshuva v'yashuv mechato chayav lehitvadot lifnei hakel baruch hu. Shenemar ki yasu v'hisvadu et chatatam asher asu zeh vidui dvar. Vidui zeh mitzvah saseh. It's if you look at the Sefer Mitzvot and the Koteret of the Rambam, this is a very other position that the Rambam staked out, a very, very, very famous one, and that is when the Rambam normally speaks about tshuva all year round, he speaks about when you do tshuva, the obligation in those circumstances to do or to frame it through the mechanism of vidui, of confession. The only time in Hilchot Tshuva where the Rambam speaks about the obligation to do tshuva is in Perek Beit Halacha Chet, when he speaks about Yom Kippur. So it's very striking, to the extent that there's a whole discussion among the Mefarshim. Does the Rambam not think that there's an obligation of tshuva? Is there an obligation of vidui when you do tshuva? I have a different take on that. I'm not going to go into that right now. But the point is that the Rambam, when he speaks about the obligation to do tshuva on Yom Kippur, right, that certainly accentuates Yom Kippur's status as he made tshuva.
Sure.
As as clear from the Chazal and so on. And yet,
and it's clear from the tefillah.
Countenances the view.
The vidui in the tefillah. I mean, it's clear from the tefillah.
Vidui. Right. We don't want to.
Vidui is in the tefillah, of course.
But I'm talking about even more so the requirement of tshuva. So it's very strange to say that chayiv kol echad lasos tshuva b'Yom Kippur, and then, especially when there's no Gemara, the Rambam's going against the evidence in the Talmud to say that the Sira Mishtaleach is mechaper even in the absence of tshuva. Even when the Rambam paskas like the Chachamim against Rebbe, he talks about Itzuma Shel Yom. This may be what Jacob was referring to before, and now I'm going to get back to this. He talks about Itzuma Shel Yom being mechaper lashavim, to those who do tshuva. Unlike the way he speaks about the requirement in Sira Mishtaleach for Chamuros, v'hu she'asa tshuva. The Rambam is using language, both in Halacha Beis and in Halacha Gimel, that comes short of a full-fledged focal point on tshuva, the act of tshuva, right, and the Sira Mishtaleach, and in the Tzuma Shel Yom, which is mechaper on Yom Kippur. And that's strange, given what he writes in Perek Beis Halacha Ches, that these are Yemei Tshuva, that there's an obligation to do tshuva. It's the only place where he speaks about the obligation to do tshuva, etc. Let me mention one other piece of the puzzle, and then let me tell you what I think is going on. The Rambam begins Hilchos Tshuva, as we discussed, by speaking about individual tshuva, a person who transgressed, he violated a prohibition, he abstained or refrained from doing a mitzvah saseh, positive commandment, whatever it is, different levels, and he must, if he wants atonement, he has to go the route of tshuva and vidui. And that's what he says. In the end of the halacha, if you look in halach aleph where we left off, the Rambam says, vidui zeh mitzvah saseh, confession is a positive requirement. And then he says, Kesad mizvadim, how do you do vidui? How do you confess properly? And he has a formula. Omer, Ona Hashem, right? You beseech the Ribono Shel Olam, please God. Chatasi avisi pashati lefanecha.
That's what I meant at the beginning.
Yeah, there's the vidui. Vasisi kach v'kach, I did the following. you say "V'harei nichamti uboshti b'masai," right? I regret and I'm mortified. I'm embarrassed about what I did. And you say "Oli these are the key components. Zei karashal vidui. This is the essence of vidui. V'chalamar bel hizvados. The more vidui, the better. Chalamar bel hizvados umarich binyan zeh. Like Sipri Tzias Mitzrayim. You know, the more the better. Amazing. You shouldn't skimp on your vidui. And what are the components of vidui that the Rambam's describing? The ones that are well known to us, but they're very powerful. Meaning, there's aziva sachet, I'm forsaking the sin. There's the charata, the sense of regret. Busha, the sense of embarrassment. Kabbalah lahaba, right? Making a serious commitment going forward that you're not going to return to that kind of behavior. It's not enough to confess, not enough to say you're sorry, right? You have to stir in yourself, right, all these feelings, embarrassment, regret. You have to have enough conviction, you know, that it isn't just lip service when you make a Kabbalah lahaba. It means that right now, the way you are right now, this is not something you will do again, right? It's a sheer where you are right now more than it is in the future, but it's important. These are all components of the vidui. What's fascinating is, if you look at the Rambam we read in Perek Beis Halacha Ches, the only place where there's a chiyuv to do tshuva, the Rambam's vidui in that context doesn't have any of these components. What does the Rambam say in Perek Beis Halacha Ches? Going back to what we said before, havidui shenogu b'kol Yisrael aval anachnu chatanu hu ikar avidui. All he says is aval anachnu chatanu. What happened to the zeu ikar shel vidui of halacha aleph? The same words, right? Is kol amarbe. Rambam does not encourage you to be marbe on Yom Kippur. Where are all the components? When the Rambam lists the vidui on the Sira Mishtaleach in Hilchot Avodas Yom Kippurim and makes reference to it in Hilchot Tshuva Perek Aleph, Halacha Gimel, there's no Kabbalah Lahaba, there's no Charata. What is it we say? Hataras Nadarim, we say, you know, properly you have to be mefaret as a neder. You have to be mefaret as a chet as well in vidui. Where's
so
the pure
he accepts just to say aval anachnu chatanu.
Aval chatanu is like generous statement. So,
Girsoes, but if anachnu chatanu and the person says it in plural, he doesn't say it for himself.
So, but before we get to that, so the in the Avodas HaMelech, some other Mefarshim as well. Some of them say, they point out this seeming discrepancy. They say, how come Halacha Aleph, Kol Amar B'Rum Shubach, all these components, and in Perek Beis Halacha Ches, it's this teeny, succinct vidui, and it's generic; it's not specific. So the Avodas HaMelech says, no. When the Ram says Aval Anachnu Chatanu, he means v'chule, etc. Fill in the blanks for what you as an individual. But it doesn't seem that way in the Rambam. So it's strange. The one day a year where you have a chiyuv tshuva is a day where the vidui is skimpy or can be skimpy, very unspecific, doesn't have all the components. It's strange. And the Sira Mishtaleach, which is this mechanism, this blockbuster mechanism of tshuva, absent this. More than that. Let's continue in Halacha Aleph. Perek Aleph Halacha Aleph. The Rambam says, second. Just 1 second, I lost my page. What page was it?
I'm on page 4.
Page 4. Perek Aleph. No, page 3? Page 3, sorry. Yeah. The Rambam says at the bottom of Halacha Aleph, right where we stopped off, V'chein balei chatos v'ashamos be'eshim mevi'in korban oseim al shigason al zdonon ein miskaper b'karbonam ad sheyasa tshuva. Even when you bring a korban chatos and korban asham, these are brought for a chet. Even then you have to do vidui and tshuva, vidui along with your tshuva. Yizvadu vidui dvarim, shenemar v'hisvadeh asher chata aleha, v'chein kol mechuy v'misas bezdin, even if you get the ultimate punishment, right? Capital punishment. Mechiyavi malchus, corporal punishment. Ein miskaper b'misasan u'likiyasan, ad sheyasa tshuva. V'chein achovu, b'kaver v'amazik, even monetary crimes, or personal damage. Afal pisha shilem lo mashu chayev lo, ena miskaper shizvada, v'yoshev milasas kazel liolam shenemer mikol chatos adam. He flips the order of tshuva and vidui, but basically the whole halach aleph is telling you, don't think tshuva and vidui are required only if that's all you do. Even if you're using the kapara of karbanos of the Beis Hamikdash, you still need or Misas Bezdin, or Tashlumin, you still need Tshuva and Vidui. So basically, all of Halacha Aleph is to tell you that Tshuva and Vidui are crucial. Then you have Halacha Beis, and here's the puzzle, another part of the puzzle. All of a sudden in Halacha Beis, the Rambam goes into enormous detail about Yom Kippur's Se'ira Mishtaleach. What's it doing here? Some of the Mefarshim say, it belongs in Nichos Avodas Yom Kippurim. It doesn't belong here. But in Nichos Avodas Yom Kippurim, actually, the Se'ira Mishtaleach's Koach HaKapara is practically ignored. Mostly they speak about it as part of the process of the Avodah. But all aspects of the Kapara part of it are spoken of in Hilchos Tshuva. So you might have thought, well, it's a continuation of what we were just talking about. We were saying you always need vidui and tshuva, even when there's a kapara. So that's why we're speaking about Se'ira Mishtaleach as an example of that. But when the Rambam speaks about Osham and Chatas, he speaks about their kapara in Hilchos Ma'aseh Karbanos. Avodas Yom Kippurim, he doesn't speak about the Se'ira Mishtaleach. Moreover, look how the Rambam introduces this halacha. If the Rambam was telling us simply that you need tshuva and vidui, not only in personal tshuva, but also in Yom Kippur and the Se'ira Mishtaleach, not only in Chatas and Osham, and Chovel, and Mazik, and so on, but even in the Se'ira Mishtaleach, what should he have done? He should have started halacha beis by saying the Se'ira Mishtaleach also requires tshuva and vidui. But that's not how he begins. Instead, he begins Se'ira Mishtaleach, lefi shehu kapara al kol Yisrael, Kohen Gadol Mizvad Alav Al Lashon Kol Yisrael. Instead of telling us that you need tshuva and vidui, the Rambam is zeroing in on a different problem. Who does the vidui?
Oh.
And what is the formulation of the vidui? What is the text? Why is he talking about that? That's not our topic. It's a total interruption, apparently. Obviously, you're going to argue that it's not. It's an interruption to what he's talking about before, right? All he's talking, we're concerned who does the vidui on the Se'ira Mishtaleach and what language they use. And then he repeats again, Se'ira Mishtaleach mechaper al kol averos shebetorah. He already said, Se'ira Mishtaleach shu kapara al kol Yisrael. All averos and all people. Kalos, achamuros. And then he goes on to say, and by the way, v'hu shasa tshuva, which is a totally different tone than halacha aleph, where he's saying that it's all there to teach you that you need tshuva and vidui. Here he's saying, oh, but you also need to do tshuva. And then he has this big chiddush that the kalos, the mitzvah say, the mitzvah say, you can get away actually without tshuva. So if anything, this halacha and the way that it's written, from beginning to end, in style and in substance, and especially given that it's an innovative substance, seems to be a non sequitur. It seems to not fit in at all with the Rambam's presentation. It doesn't belong in Hilchos Tshuva, perhaps. Certainly doesn't belong in the second halacha after the magnificent first halacha establishes the principle and the centrality of vidui and tshuva. The Se'ira Mishtaleach is a distraction at best an interruption more likely. So what's it doing here? This is the Rambam, the master organizer. He could have put it all in Avodas Yom Kippurim. But I think that the answer is as follows. Before I go to the answer, I'm going to stop for a moment to see if there are any questions. Any questions? They could be about Dikduk or whatever. But
can't wait for the solution, Rabbi.
Could we distinguish between Chata'im being Adam Lamakom, the Adam L'Chavero, and perhaps the Sir HaMishtaleach would be related to Hashem's forgiving the Am Yisrael, and that tshuva is required for individuals?
The last point is the point that I want to pursue. On the question of Benodam Lamakom, Benodam L'Chavero, so I refer you to Halacha Perek Beis, Hilchos Tshuva Halacha Tes, on page probably 4, where the Rambam writes, Eina Tshuva, Below Yom Kippurim, Mechaprim El Avero Shebenodam Lamakom. That Tshuva and Yom Kippur, and again, it's interesting that he contrasts them. This is also consistent with what I've been pointing out. Eina Tshuva Velo Yom Kippurim, right? Yom Kippur is not mechaper without tshuva, according to the Rambam. We pass him like the Chachamim, right? But he still says, Eina tshuva v'lo Purim, maybe means the Sira Mishtaleach and Kalos, mechaperin el avera sheben adam lamakom, only between man and God, kilom mishachol dvar iser bal be'ila sura kiyotzaben. Aval avera sheben adam lachavero, kilom achovos chavero mekal chavero goes lo v'kiyotzaben, and an imchalo ad shiton l'chavero mashu chayv lo v'yiratzeu, etc. Meaning you have to do a personal, you have to interact with the person that you violated, right? Your victim, you need him as well. So that isn't the answer here, but I think the second point that you made is the answer.
Rabbi,
Could it also,
Yeah. Go ahead. Question?
could it also,
do I have to tell him?
I think Adele was first, and then she was in the middle. Yeah.
could this also be related to the distinction we made on Rosh Hashanah about Shabbat and the Karbanot, that there is a difference between halacha in the Gvulot and halacha for the Mikdash? And could we then view this as part of a sui generis, an exceptional kind of halacha that's just relating to the Mikdash, and that we can't compare it to what's on the ground for us outside of the Mikdash? I mean, for example, I know that another example would be like Shatnez, the big day kahuna, the Avnet is Shatnez. And,
Right.
and so we're not allowed on the Gvulot to wear Shatnez, but the Kohen Gadol, when he's doing his kapara, he's wearing Shatnez. So it seems to me that there's a carved out, a special kind of ruling system.
Right. I think that is true generally. I don't think that that's the issue so much here, even though the Avodas Mikdash. But remember that the Sir Mishtaleach actually is disposed of, at least, outside of the Mikdash, right?
But he starts out in Mikdash, yeah.
It starts off in the Mikdash, correct. And this is what I call a yin and yang. I'll explain that in a minute, between the two.
I'm listening to
As far as the, and remember that Itzumo Shel Yom, Yom Kippur itself, which is Mechaper, that applies Bein B'Mikdash, Bein B'Gvul. That's not only in the Mikdash. That's even Bizman Hazeh. That's even in Manhattan. You know, Itzumo Shel Yom is Mechaper. So I don't think that's the point. I think, Rachel, you had a question?
בנוגע לבן אדם לחברו, do I have to tell him exactly what I have done to him? Like, הלבנתי פניך ברבים. Do I have to be specific?
This is a very famous debate, you know, among the poskim. There are those who think, I think Rabbi Yisrael Salanter and others, who think that, yes, you really do. And others think that that would be not such a wise, but it might be enough, you know, for you to say, you know, I did something, you know, improper. Again, the Rambam here the word about, not insulting him, but, stealing from him. Or then, of course, you have to return what you...
But if the person's Michael without you telling
that's
him,
a major
fine,
debate.
right?
Maybe I'll speak about that another year. The Rabbi Salanter and the Chavetz Chaim, others discuss whether or not you have to detail what you did to him, ben Adam L'Chavero. That's a controversial... See,
according to the Rambam, what he's saying.
what's that?
What Rambam is saying about...
You're breaking up a little bit. But either way, I don't want to get into that now because that's not our topic. So let me get back to the main point. Let me make the following suggestion. And this goes to part of what you said. And that is the idea of kapara, which is completely disentangled from tshuva, is very difficult to comprehend. And therefore, let's start with my first question, which is how, according to Rebbe, is it appropriate to call Seras Yemei Tshuva when it all builds up to the Mechila and the Slicha of Yom Kippur, which according to Rebbe,
do you know, if we have lids for the Starbucks cups?
is Yitzuma Shel Yom Mechaper. So I'd like to suggest that all of this belongs in Hilchos Tshuva, that these days are, by definition, Yemei Tshuva, even according to Rebbe, who thinks that Yitzuma Shel Yom is Mechaper without Tshuva, and certainly, according to the Rambam, that the Korban Sira Mishtaleach is Mechaper on Mitzvos Kalos, Beli Tshuva. What they have in mind and what they mean, basically, is not that you can ignore tshuva, but there are two different ways to do tshuva. There is a tshuva that we speak of in Halacha Aleph, Perek Aleph Halacha Aleph, and that is a tshuva that is spurred by, the catalyst is a particular Aveira. Right? You did, that's exactly how the Rambam starts with tshuva. Kol mitzvah shabbatorah ben aseh ben lo saseh im avar adam al achas mehen, right? Ben bezadon, ben bishgaga, kishi yasa tshuva, v'yashuv micheto, chayev lizvados. That refers to individual chatoim of individual transgressors. And that's the first law or the first focus of tshuva, your own private behavior as a private and responsible halachic citizen who needs to square his record with the Ribono Shalom, right? Your omeid lifnei Hashem. And that requires tshuva and vidui. And about that vidui we say, kol amarich hareza meshubach. And with respect to that vidui and that particular chet, right, there should be charata, regret, busha, sense of humiliation. There should be kabbalah lahaba. You should have so much conviction that right now you don't stand to repeat that sin. Maybe what happens to you afterwards will change you again. According to your present state of mind, right, and your status, as a religious personality at this moment, right, you're not omeid, your kabbalah lahaba is not a davar shalom baliola. It's something we can rely upon. Because you're talking about a specific challenge and the neutralization, right, of that particular inclination, action, the consequences of that action, etc. And then the Rambam continues in the rest of Halacha Aleph, and he says, anytime you are addressing an individual sin, or many individual sins, but one at a time mostly, for example, you bring a chatas, or you bring an asham. When you bring a chatas and asham, there's no collective, there's no group plan. What's interesting? That the Rambam omitted Ola. In Hilchos Ma'aseh Karbanos, Perek Gimel, Halacha Yudalad and Tesvav, it's a little late, so I'm not going to read it right now, but it's in the Mar Makomos. The Rambam speaks about when you bring an Ola, a Korban Ola, a burnt offering that is completely burnt on the Mizbeach, so you do the smicha and you do vidui. And on the vidui, you speak about the mitzvah that you neglected, the hurhuria, whatever it is, you do vidui and tshuva. But the Rambam omits it here in Perek Aleph Halacha Aleph. I think the reason for that is that the Gemara in Zvachim discusses the possibility that you can, in Ola, unlike a Chatas, bundle many Chatoim under one Ola. That's not what the Rambam is talking about in Perek Aleph Halacha Aleph. The core of Hilchos Tshuva begins by facing every individual chet. You have to do a serious introspection with a magnifying glass or a microscope. And no infraction is too small, right, for you to take responsibility or for it to affect your relationship with the Ribono Shel Olam. And that's, even if you want to go to the mechanism of Chatas and Asham, or Misas Bezdin, or Mechuyivei Malkus, they're all about individual transgressions. Or Chovel B'Chavero, Mazik Mamono, right? You still have to integrate with that Tshuva and Vidui. And the Tshuva and Vidui that we're talking about is the Kol Amar B'Reza V'Shubach type, frankly. Then comes Halacha Beis. If Halacha Beis were just a continuation of Halacha Aleph saying, and you need Tshuva and Vidui also in the Sirah Mishtaleach, then it shouldn't have been written the way that it's written. It starts off wrong, like I said before. It starts off with who does the vidui on the Sirah Mishtaleach? Who's talking about the Sirah Mishtaleach? Then all of a sudden we want to know who is the Misvada, and what is the language al Lashon Kol Yisrael, and why is it relevant for this halacha? What's it doing here? And then maybe v'kalos, you don't even need to do tshuva. And when he says you do need to do tshuva, for the chamuros, it's v'husha asa tshuva. It's like an afterthought, right? What is this? And the chiddush of b'li tshuva. I believe that halacha beis is the transition where the Ram says, I'm going to give you now the exact opposite. We just talked about an individual transgressions, and that, of course, is the foundation of tshuva. Now I'm going to talk about, a completely different mechanism of tshuva, and that is tshuva by means of the tzibur, Klal Yisrael, which relates to not only every member of Klal Yisrael as a tzibur, but also all of your chataim together collectively. The Sirah Mishtaleach, as the Mishnah says, that's why the Rambam says twice. It applies to every member of Klal Yisrael, and it applies practically all. It's not just a laundry list, of what it applies to. The Rambam saying I have a second model of opposite. Kol Yisrael, Kol Averos. So how does he start? He says, Sirah Mishtaleach is a form of tshuva. It's not a korban which also requires tshuva. I'll explain why it's a form of tshuva in just a second. Sirah Mishtaleach, lefi shehu kapara Kol Yisrael, koin gadol misvad alav al lashon Kol Yisrael. Why does he begin that way? Who's talking about Sirah Mishtaleach and who does the vidui? Aaron HaKohen does the vidui because he represents Klal Yisrael. And therefore it's al lashon Kol Yisrael. The Minchas Chinuch discusses, in personal vidui, can you have a shliach do vidui for you? Let's say I'm not a good, I can't bring myself to say the words. Can I appoint a shliach, a messenger, an agent, to do? Minchas Chinuch says, I guess you could, because Aaron HaKohen did it for the Sirah Mishtaleach. So some of the Achronim, including Reb Chaim, so that's not the pshat in this Rambam. Well, that's not the pshat in Aaron HaKohen. The idea is it's a collective korban. It is it's not shlichus in the sense that I'm representing each individual. It's Aaron HaKohen representing corporate Klal Yisrael, al lashon Kol Yisrael, maybe vidui in halacha aleph, the kolamar ba'reza meshubach part, maybe can't be done al yidei shliach. Halacha base probably isn't al yidei shliach either. It's al yidei Aaron, not any shliach. It has to be a person who represents the corporate interests of Klal Yisrael vis-a-vis kapara. That's the Kohen Gadol. Al Lishon Kol Yisrael. So the Rambam isn't a distraction. The Rambam saying, in Halach Aleph, I gave you one paradigm of tshuva. Now I'm giving you a second paradigm of tshuva. Kol Averos, Kol Yisrael, together. The Sir Mishtalech Mechaper al Kol Averos Shabbatorah Kalas Achamuros, Bein Bezadon, Bein Bishgaga, Bein Hoda, Lo Hoda, right? Hakol Meskaper B'Sir Mishtalech. Why does he repeat again? Hakol Meskaper B'Sir Mishtalech. He said it already. Meaning this is a collective for the tzibur, and it's a collective for you as an individual. V'hushas tshuva. On the chamuras, you have to have done tshuva. If you're mored, then you can't be part of the group. The group has standards. If it's only lo saseh and aseh, then you don't even have to have done tshuva. In lo asa tshuva, ein asar mechaper el alakalos. How does it work, and why does it work? What is it about the Sira Mishtaleach that allows you to short circuit, that allows you to do a tzibur-oriented tshuva on everything together, and even to bypass, to downgrade what tshuva is, why tshuva is required, let's say, and even to allow for circumstances where there is no tshuva? The answer is because it's intrinsically tshuva in its own right. Why? What is the lesson? What is the message of the Sira Mishtaleach? The message of the Sira Mishtaleach is you have these two goats. They're not actual twins, but we say about them that they're shavin, b'mare, b'koma, right? B'lekichasan kiachad. You bought them together. They look alike. They're the same height, right? The same color. What's the point of that? If you look in the psukim in Parshas Achrei Mos, it's a yin and a yang. It's like your whole, when you read the psukim in Achrei Mos, it's like you're moving your head, back and forth. Oh, what's going on with the Sira Nasa B'fnim? And meanwhile, what's happening back in, with the Sira Mishtaleach? Why? The language of the psukim says it. V'hu chatas. It sounds in the psukim as if both of them as a unit together are a single chatas. Now, there's a debate among the Rishonim. I'm not going to get into that right now. Whether some Sira Mishtaleach has a korban, and if so, at what point does it lose that? Only before the Hagrala of the lottery? Even after the lottery till the Vidui? The Rashba and Shavuos, here in the Marmakoma, says the Shiluach HaSoyer is the Hakrava. Either way, the Seira Mishtaleach, another view in the Rashba, is a korban together with the parallel opposite, the Seira Nasa B'fnim. What does that mean? What it means is as follows. Yom Kippur is a day of loyalty. I've said this many times in the past because I believe it. It's a black and white day in which, after having struggled for a week, beginning with Rosh Hashanah, maybe the most complex day of the year, the rest of Aseret Yemei Tshuva focuses on individual chataim and starts building up to Kates, Slicha, Umechila, Kol Yisrael. Says the Rambam, Lefikach, Chayavim, Kol Yisrael, Lasos Tshuva. The only time it is a Chiyuv Tshuva, not just a Vidui. The day of Yom Kippur is the day of Kulal Hashem. And the Seirim are a little bit of a embodiment of that. Either you're going in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, breaking rules of breaking the intimate bond, the intimate precincts, invading the intimate precincts of the Ribono Shel Olam. That's led to Hashem. And if not, then the counterpart is going to be thrown down the tzuk. It's Azazel. There's no in-betweens on Yom Kippur. Of course, there are always in-betweens in people's lives, but Yom Kippur is a basic day of loyalty. If one understands the Sira Mishtaleach and identifies with it and is associated with it, and he's a Knah, then that's a form of tshuva. Tshuva isn't just about neutralizing one sin at a time or all your sins, bundling. It's about adopting a certain religious persona. It's about being lifnei Hashem, Shetaharu. Ki bayom hazeh yichaper lechem, l'tahareschem, mikol chatosechem. Not each one, all of them. Lifnei Hashem Titaru. Rabbeinu Yonah says, Lifnei Hashem Titaru is a special chiyuv tshuva for Yom Kippur. And I always like to say, it's the tshuva of tahara. When you go in a mikveh, right, it's not piecemeal, it's all holistic. You have to all be in the mikveh, or nothing works. All or nothing. That's what the Shir Mistalech is on. Kol ha'averos, practically. And it's Kol Yisrael. And that's why the Kohen Gadol is the Mizvada al Lashon Yisrael. So you can circuit the tshuva of each individual chet, as long as you're not omid b'mirdo, right? If it's a capital crime, you can't ignore it. If it's a lav or an asay, then it's subsumed under the kapara of the Sira Mishtaleach. Not v'husha asa tshuva for one, right? Separate condition. It can't be omid b'mirdo. And in the other, even if technically he didn't do tshuva on each individual chet, this is his way of holistically connecting himself and associating himself. B'toras, a member of the tzibor, and b'toras, his own kol chatav b'vasachas. So for that reason, why is it, as I said before, on the one day where there's a chiyuv to do tshuva, the vidui says simply aval anachnu chatanu? Why is there no al haba and charata and being mefaret each chet? Why did you have that in the Sira Mishtaleach? Actually, the Meiri, the Chibra Tshuva, says that the Sira Mishtaleach has different variants. I'll tell you two other views very quickly. The Meiri in his Chibra Tshuva thinks he's saying this for the Rambam, but it's definitely not in the Rambam. But he thinks it is because he's influenced by the Rambam. He says, the Sira Mishtaleach, Chitzuma Shayom Mechaper, all these things are just triggers for tshuva. They inspire you to tshuva. But what really does the kapara in all cases is the tshuva. Ad kedei kach, listen to this. The Meiri says, when Aaron HaKohen, or the Kohen Gadol, is doing the vidui on the Sira Mishtaleach, says the Meiri, in my opinion, Mishein Libo Nokfo should be reciting his own personal vidui. Because it's just to inspire you as an individual. I don't think that's about the Rambam at all. I think it's the opposite. The Rambam says you don't need to do individual vidui. You can just say, well, aval anachnu chatanu. But there's no kabbalah haba if you want to integrate, do you want to do tshuva through the tzibor? Or you want to do tshuva holistically? Because there are 10 different averos, or 100 different averos. Not that you don't need charata or kabbalah, but these are categories that go to Perek Aleph Halakha Aleph. They don't really apply to Perek Aleph Halakha base. The tshuva of the tzibur, the tshuva, which is a package, holistic deal. You can't be omed b'mered v'hushas a tshuva in the chamuras, but then later on aval anachnu chatanu. Not only that. The Rambam says in Perek Beis that we say vidui, right? We say vidui all day, aval anachnu chatanu, fine. But the Rambam says we say, and this is in the Tfilos, we say vidui in silent Shemona Esrei, and we say vidui again in Chazaras Hashatz, correct?
Sure.
Do we say it in the same place?
No, I don't think so.
I put you on the line last week. It was, but I hope you enjoyed saying Zichron Shua on Shabbos.
Absolutely.
Okay, so here look at Halacha Zayin, the Ram Perik Beis Halacha Zayin. Yafal Pishus Vad, Ram says, Choser Mizvada B'Shachris, B'Musaf B'Mincha B'Nila. V'Hechan Mizvada, Yochid Achar Tfilaso, V'Shliach Tzibor, B'Emsa Tfilaso B'Bracha Reviyah.
Yeah.
Right? If you notice the structure of the tefillah, we say all the al-chetz really after Shemona Esrei is over. Right?
Yeah.
We finished really the brachos of Shemona Esrei. But when the Chazan does the Chazar Sashatz, right? And all the tzibur does it together, it's part of the Shemona, it's before. Right? It's before Modim.
Sure.
Why is that? As if to accentuate, Yom Kippur is man, Kate Slicha Mechila Liyachid, Ula Rabim. It's Liyachid in its way, and L'Rabim. It's not a hefsek in tefillah. Tefillah satzibor. I've said this in the past also, but just look at how do we say vidui? Two ways. Hasham de Bagad and Gazal, very general. Right? And the other one is al-chet, al-chet, al-chet. So this year, everybody's worried about, getting out early, because of the, the virus. So they want to figure out all these strategies, about how to cut down the tefillos, take out this piyut, take out that piyut. People want to cut down the kolos, whatever. I understand. I legitimately have to make minyanim, sometimes 2 minyanim, with the same time period to accommodate people so they can distance. So they're always looking to cut out. So is anybody going to cut out? I hope not. Is anybody cut out some of the al-chetz? Did any individual ever violate every one of those al-chetz?
I doubt it very much.
Right? Unlikely. There are probably some we could put in, but there are certainly many we could take out. Why do we have that whole litany and list? I think the answer is because on Yom Kippur, right, whether it's through Itzumo Shel Yom or through the Siyar Mishtaleach, the whole idea being Kate Zman, Slicha, Umechila, Liyachid, Ularabim, and the whole theme of Yom Kippur is this idea of partially of collective tshuva as well as holistic tshuva. Therefore, it doesn't really matter. We're going through like a range of things. It doesn't matter whether we violated them. That's why, you speak about your past years, chatoim. We speak about chatoim that we never did. And we shouldn't cut them out. They're very important. You have a category of chatoim which refer to categories of karbonos. Al chatoim that we violate, that we should bring a chatos. Al chatoim that we bring an asham. Al chatoim that we bring a... It's so strange. But not really. Not if the idea is collective and holistic tshuva. So for this reason, we say Abala Nachnu Chatanu. Dafka on the day which is a chiyuv tshuva. There's a chiyuv tshuva for the same reason that there's the options of collective tshuva. And even though we paskin like the Chachamim, which is that if you are not, a shav, Itzumo Shel Yom is not going to be mechaper. The way the Rambam says it is based on the Gemara. Itzumo Shel Yom is mechaper lashavim. That doesn't mean, well, what do you need Itzumo Shel Yom for if you're going to do tshuva? The Siyar Mishtaleach is mechaper in the way that I spoke of before, because it represents this conviction, this loyalty test, this understanding, that on Yom Kippur, everything is Kula Lashem, or it's Lazoza. The Itzumo Shel Yom is mechaper, because it is actually the expression of Kula Lashem. It's v'nisa misnafsho seichem. It's living the whole day in a way that underscores that your spiritual side is your primary identity. It's not the way we live all year round. But on Kippur, we show what we're capable of. That's why we paskin, is in the date in the Gemara, that Itzumo Shayom is mechaper only at the end of the day. You have to achieve the totality.
I was going to ask a question, yeah.
If you can do this a whole day, Kula Lashem, Achas Pashana, then you don't need technical tshuva according to Rebbe. And for the Chachamim, it works Lashavim. By the way, but not if you rebel against Yom Kippur. If you don't believe in Yom Kippur, what's the point of it?
Sure.
Or if you're a Porek Ol and a Mefer Bris, then of course it doesn't work. Because the idea, it's a of tshuva itself. Just not the tshuva of Perek Aleph Halacha Aleph. The tshuva, in the case of Yitzum Yom, together with the rest of Klal Yisrael, but as an individual, the tshuva of embracing the challenge of Kula Hashem, or the collective tshuva being part of and also identifying with the choice of the Seir HaMishtalech. So let me conclude by saying, I'm sorry I went a little over time, but let's conclude by saying, that again, we began by noting that this is a period called Asaros Yemei Tshuva, that Yom Kippur is considered the climax of that period, that the Rambam saves the obligation to do tshuva for Yom Kippur. He calls it the be-all and end-all, the Keit Slicha Mechila L'Yachid L'Rabim. And yet it seems like you can completely cut out tshuva on Yom Kippur in the two most salient institutions of Yom Kippur, Yitzum Shayom and the Seir HaMishtalech. And what we've tried to explain is not the case. Rather, Seir HaMishtalech and Yitzum Shayom are themselves, when properly pursued, expressions of Amida Lefnei Hashem and Lefnei Hashem Titaru. They themselves, through different mechanisms, accomplish Shuvas Hagavra and Shuvas Harab. So I want to wish everybody a Gemar.
Thank you so much, Rabbi.
We've had a year in which we have had to deal with as individuals and also as a community. So the Keit Slicha Mechila L'Yachid L'Rabim, I think, is particularly powerful theme this year, and it should be in our tefillos. And we wish everybody B'soros Tovos, good health.
Amen.
Gemar Chasim.
Thank you, Henry. Thank you, Rabbi. Shkoch. Thank you,
from tonight in the sukkah, right?
Yes. Look,
everybody's individual sukkah.
Yeah, it's a Zoom sukkah. Everyone's sukkah.
Are you allowed to come? Are you allowed to hear the Zoom if you're not in a sukkah?
I don't know, Rabbi. You make the rules. It's your shir.
Okay, we'll be in
your
touch.
Shir. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Rabbi.
I want to ask you,
Bye-bye.
if I may. I have the Machzor in front of me, and you were so correct when you said that this Ketz Mechila or Slicha, Kol HaMaseinu, is really at the end of the day.
Yeah.
The end of the day. Itzumo Shel Yom is, to my understanding, but I may be wrong, of course, is that either the entire day or perhaps at the time of when we do the vidui, which is more in the middle of the day.
Well,
על כל עוונותינו, ונשוב אליך לעשות חוקר רצונך בלבב שלם.
Right.
So what happened the whole day if the whole thing is, the purpose is to, that we are going to do tshuva to you belevav shalem.
Right. But there's actually debate, la halacha, which we accept la halacha, but I think the preponderant view is that Itzumo Sheyom is Mechaper B'sof Hayom.
Uh-huh. Therefore, we have it in Ato Ivdalta, Ketzum Chila Slicha. Yeah. Ketzum Chila Slicha Kol Abanuseinu. That's why the Ato Ivdalta, unfortunately, we always have to rush. But if I would have more time, I would stress it even more in the beginning. Okay.
Are they davening? How did the davening go?
Well, I was not here. I did not daven Rosh Hashanah in the shul.
Oh, I think you told me, right?
My wife and I and the children were here in the mountains, and we daven outside under a huge tent. And okay, the Baal Tefillah, okay, I'm not arguing about that. But Yom Kippur, I'm davening, of course. We are coming back to the city.
Oh, you
tomorrow.
are coming back?
Yes, of course. Yom Kippur, of course.
And are they inside or they're in the ballroom? Where is
No,
it?
not in the ballroom. It's in the shul with social distancing.
Ah.
And I don't know how many can come, and I'm sure that we will have more people on Yom Kippur than on Rosh Hashanah. And how we'll be able, we may even need to do 2 minyan.
Were there a lot of people Rosh Hashanah?
They had about 40, 50 people. And Yom Kippur, I'm sure there'll be more people, but most of the people are just away and they are not coming.
Okay, so Lat, we hope things will start turning.
Of course.
Hopefully,
but, absolutely, but Ato Ivdalta, that's a very important tefillah, apparently.
Yeah.
Because after the shiur today,
Well, I think it was probably an important tefillah even before.
Obviously. But the fact is, what is the ketz here? Ketz umechila uslicham. Again, the end of mechila. What does it mean? The word. I know the word ketz, which means ending. But what does it mean in this context here?
I think that, in other words, because of Itzumos Shel Yom and the opportunity of Yom Kippur, etc. So this is viewed as really, like a can't miss, kind of a thing. I'll give you an example. The Sefer HaChinuch, in his mitzvah of tshuva, says it's a mitzvah say, and then he says, Umisha lo, something like Umisha avar velo asa tshuva b'yom kippur. He's not talking about Yom Kippur, he's talking about tshuva. Yes. And then he concludes in the end, he says, Misha avar velo asa tshuva b'yom kippurim, right? Avar, Allah say. In the sense that, but it's a mitzvah to do tshuva kol shana. It's not a mitzvah on Yom Kippur.
Right. We say it in Shmones 3 times a day. Yeah.
The acuity of the expectation and the opportunity of tshuva on Yom Kippur is such that it's a case, meaning it's a critical moment. It's a testing moment. It doesn't come again. If you ignore, this opportunity, then you've lost something that you can't retrieve. In that sense, it's case. It's like a last chance, it's a decisive, moment.
Yes. Anyway, Yashar Koach, thank you very, very much. Well, are you not giving a shiur next Tuesday, the day after Yom Kippur, are you?
No. Usually people, I find, are...
They're tired.
Well, not tired, I think more getting ready for, the Daled Minim, building a sukkah.
Yeah.
So I think we always give that week off.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. Especially night.
Big Yashar Koach and Gmar Chasima Tova. My wife sits here and she loves the shiur.
I enjoy your shiur very much.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yashar Koach.
You had many sad.
Yes.
Unfortunately.
Only
Let it be a better year. Yeah.
Better year for all of us.
And regards to the whole family and.
Thank you.
And we should hear besorot tovot.
Amen.
Amen.
Kol tov.
Gemar Chatima Tova to everybody. Rachel.
Good to see you as well. This is Oppenheim. And
Gemar Chatima. Gemar Chatima Tova.
Thank you very much. I think I saw you twice today.
Yes.
That's right. Okay.
One time unseen.
And Mr. Wollman, thank you again for your very kind words.
My wife was saying to me quietly, who is this lady who is a Talmud Chochem?
כל הכבוד.
Yeah, always asks and makes very good comments and good questions. So
Yes. Okay, Kol Tov, and again, Gmar
חתימה טובה.
גמר חתימה טובה.
thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.